China's fight against poverty as the country gears up for its major political season. A look back at what made its battle against absolute poverty possible. What are the priorities ahead? And the Texas blackout, major power outages amid record cold weather are raising big questions about what went wrong with the state's power grid system and if the crisis could have been avoided. I'm Zhong Shi in for Lucian today. Welcome to The Point. Last November, China announced it had eliminated absolute poverty nationwide, achieving its poverty alleviation target as scheduled. Over the past 7 decades, 700 million people have been lifted out of poverty across the country, with nearly 100 million of those getting out of poverty in just the past 8 years. Now, as China prepares for its major political meetings next month to map out its future, it's time for a look back to focus on some key achievements. How did China fight poverty? What's the impact? And looking ahead, how can these efforts be sustainable? Joining me today for the discussion from Beijing via Skype, Goodrum, senior editor and columnist at China Daily, and also in Beijing, Yunyun, chief commentator at Beijing Review. Yunyun and Yin, great to have both of you on our program today. First, let's put things into perspective here. Before the founding of the People's Republic of China, China had one of the highest numbers of poor people in the world. Over the past 70 years, more than 700 million poor people have been lifted out of poverty. Yunyun, let me start with you. Help us understand how significant is this achievement. Take us beyond the numbers and help us make sense of what China has accomplished.
Well, since you asked what China has accomplished, and let me tell you a personal story. I am not just an eyewitness of this great transformation. I am one of the great transformation. And let me tell you a personal story. Before I went to Beijing to study in a university, and local government officials actually knocked on my doors and said, "Do you need help with the college tuition fees?" Then I said, "No." And they said, it's very rare for a kid in a poor village to have a college student. And I said, I'm not poor because I do not have a sense of what being poor looks like, because everyone around me was poor. So I went to Beijing and to look at the bustling cities in Beijing and Shanghai and Guangzhou, and this eye-widening experience have let me know that, wow, I was poor. So I think one of the major problems for a lot of poor people in poor areas of China, is that they do not know that they are poor because they are surrounded by people who have been poor. And now my personal experiences have been telling is that my village has now been transformed into a bustling district of the Nanjing city, and my family has been out of poverty, and a lot of my neighbors and friends have been out of poverty since then. So I think, to put the number into perspective, I am one of the number.
What a vivid story, which helps us understand how things have changed on a personal level, how people's lives have been touched and changed in this process. Yin, in your observation, what does lifting people out of extreme poverty mean for China as a whole and even for the world?
Well, just as what was just said, it's one thing to say that there's 700 million people that have been lifted out of poverty in the last 71 years, but it's easy to forget also that each one of those numbers is a person. There's families, there's villages, there's counties that have had their experiences profoundly changed. Myself personally, I mean, I wouldn't say that I grew up in poverty, but there was certainly a poorer area of the county in Texas where I grew up, and that's where I spent the first 10 or 12 years of my life. And it was and I had a similar experience, in fact, because I moved from the poorer section of the county that I was from in Texas to I changed school districts, in fact, to a school district that had the more wealthy part of the county represented in the school that I was attending. And so suddenly things changed. I mean, the reality is very different in the United States than it is from China in terms of where poverty is and where people are, but there is certainly divides. And so having that experience and then coming here and seeing a more drastic kind of poverty, but a poverty that is being eradicated. That it's not just about, it's not just about the numbers. It's about these people that have been living possibly without electricity, without running water, without adequate shelter for a period of time, or if they have shelter, it's been a long time since it was renovated. And what China has done is for these people, it is built new institutions, new public services. And as someone who's from Texas, I mean, I can tell you, hearing from what was happening to my friends and family back home, there is no doubt that reliable, stable public services are something that can't be taken for granted and are an essential part of a dignified, full life.
You shared with us how local officials in your hometown went out of their way to reach out to you, to ask you if you needed help. Do you think that is representative of how local officials do things in this process of reducing and alleviating poverty? Also, help us understand how China as a whole did it to lift this many people out of poverty.
Well, I think it's a different approach. In the past, we take different approaches. In the past, like the years before 2012, it is a kind of system where when you become, have a kind of prestige, for instance, in your education, and then people would knock on your doors and said, do you need help? But at this time, at this stage, it is a completely different. President Xi Jinping proposed the idea of targeted poverty alleviation, meaning that the authorities or local officials would knock on door to door to every family before they even know, before the family members even know they have been poor, and talking to them, do you need help? I think that is a vast difference between now and then. So if you were asking me about whether the situation has been changed, I think one of the crucial problems between now and then is the mentality of the local government. You know, in the past, remain poor or being listed as a poor area in China actually has a lot of benefits. You would get funding from, the higher level governments or the central government and private and state-owned enterprises. So actually, being poor is a rewarding for local officials, and they would get a promotion for attracting more funds into their local areas. But now things have become different, because in the past, when this promotion is based on how much resources you've been taken, so the appraisal is, seeing the tangible, what I call the above ground achievements. Roads and bridges and shiny buildings and tall skyscrapers, and people would forget what is underlying that ground, what I call the invisible part of the whole society, which means education, health checks and social security, trainings of different kinds of skills, and that would take years to take efforts. So now and then there is a huge difference. People are concentrating on from above ground construction to like the invisible part of the society.
Understood. Yin, I want to stay on the topic of targeted poverty alleviation, meaning applying tailored relief measures to fit different local conditions. This goes way beyond local officials knocking on your door, offering their help. How uniquely Chinese is this approach, and is it applicable to other countries because poverty is a universal problem?
That's true. Even in my home country, the United States, the poverty rate by their standards hasn't gone below 11% since 1971. So it is a universal problem, certainly. And as you mentioned, the early years of the PRC saw such great improvements in quality of life standards across the board. The basic metrics like life expectancy, literacy, infant mortality, that for that first period of time, you were able to have these large-scale policies that affected enormous groups of people and drove the progress and drove the narrowing of gaps in quality of life. But as we get to the so-called last mile of poverty alleviation, you have to be more precise, more targeted. You can't just create a blanket policy that affects everybody. You have to go into the county level or the village level and determine what are the strengths of this place? What are the resources that could be mobilized? And the resources aren't necessarily industrial. They could be a particular local crop that could be appealing to people across the country. With development of logistics, you can transport those crops to other places and sell at a premium and sort of redistribute through agriculture and through e-commerce. The resources of a community might be tourism. There might be specific sites that are of interest to the population of China or the world that you can promote through the resources that you get via these poverty alleviation efforts. Each local community, each locality has to determine what its best features are and enhance those. And that is how we have seen such an incredible effort being made. And that's true everywhere. Everywhere has something to offer. And what China has done is through policy promoted those unique strengths of each place and created a rising tide through those kinds of targeted measures. And certainly they can be applicable to all kinds of places. All countries have communities. All communities have some kind of unique feature that makes them worth living in. And to promote that and turn it into an engine of poverty alleviation is an outstanding achievement.
Yunyun, how do we sustain the successes, and I should add hard-won successes, China pulled off last year while fighting a pandemic that is still raging in many parts of the world? China successfully reached its goal of eliminating absolute poverty by the end of 2020. Going forward from this point on, how do we protect those results and prevent people from falling back into poverty?
Actually, the government officials, especially the top leadership of the Chinese government, has thought of this problem beforehand, and they need to consolidate the results that we have achieved. And for instance, there is a less reported story among the Chinese officials, is that they would remain in their post for a few years until their poverty alleviation efforts have been concreted. Which means you cannot just say, well, I have accomplished the things that I meant to do, and then I would get a promotion and to transfer to somewhere else. No, things are not done like that. The officials are going to stay where they are, and they would stay put and to see whether these people have returning to poverty. So a lot of concrete work has been done, and I think much of the pressure are on the local government officials, and they need to go to door, not just during the past few years when they are striving for eliminating absolute poverty, but in the future. So there would still be punishment for the people who have left people still returning back to poverty.
Ian, the same question to you. Is it enough to have those officials stay in their posts to monitor the process for a few years, especially post-pandemic?
Well, I mean, this is the most trying time, right? This is the moment where the will of the government is going to be tested in their mission to really and truly eliminate poverty. I think that certainly keeping officials in their post in order to make sure that it takes and holds is a valid step. But this is a long-term issue. Absolute poverty is a certain guideline. It's a quality of life measured in certain dollar amounts. But certainly there is still a long road in terms of eliminating even extreme poverty. Of course, we have to focus on first, but now the next step is poverty in general. Getting somebody above the $1.99 is good, but why not even further? So the fact that this is a long-term goal and that there's been no indication that anybody's going to rest on their laurels, and that it's in fact an ideological goal, because as we know in the 19th National Congress, it was declared the primary contradiction is now between unequal development and the people's desire for a better life. That means that this is a long-term plan. This is a guiding principle of the ideology of the country and the mission of the country. So I don't foresee anybody kind of kicking back and relaxing even after this major goal is met. There's a long road to hoe, and I don't see any reason why anybody should stop. And I don't think the Chinese government feels any different. They're in it for the long haul.
It's been a great discussion with both of you. Goodrum, senior editor and columnist at China Daily, Yunyun, chief commentator at Beijing Review. Thank you so much for your insight and your analysis. We'll take a short break now. When we return, Texans are still stuck without power days after record cold temperatures triggered major power outages across the U.S. state. What went wrong and how severe is the damage?